Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Open Minds. For anyone who is joining this for the first time, I think this is my third episode now. And really, this is a bit of a ongoing experiment in the idea of, it's kind of like a lunch and learn, but doing it live. I was actually saying to Philippe just before this session, I think one of the great joys of some of these big conversations that we have is actually in the process of the conversation itself, as opposed to what we do often see on LinkedIn, which is here are the 5 solutions or here are the top 3 tips. It's very like information is one way, but sometimes it is in the playing with the idea that allows us to see new perspectives. And that's something that I've always liked, but I've often always kept it, I guess, behind, like in private conversations. And I thought, it'd be cool to do something like this live, given that we have this technology. And also given that, yesterday we had Are You OK Day? And often Are You OK is about mindsets, it's about mental health, about the space that we're all in. And sometimes ways of breaking through that is seeing different perspectives. And so I think part of this conversation is about, or part of Open Minds is about having those types of conversations. And so if this is something that for anyone who's watching this, you're interested in, basically the plan is I'm doing this I usually every Thursday or Friday, probably a Friday, around noon. So make sure to follow me for notifications of when this happens, and grab a cuppa, come on in, and it's just an easy conversation. It's just like an open and square conversation type of a situation. And if you do have any topics that you want to discuss with me or engage or debate or whatever that might be, please send me a message. I'd love to just expand my mind, and hopefully be able to expand everyone else's mind as well at the same time. So with that said, today I am rejoined by Philippe. Philippe, how's it going?
I'm very well. Thank you, Scott.
So Philippe was my guest from last week as well. And in that topic, we talked about, in that session rather, we talked about meditation, about the topic of, I called it applied meditation. And it was because for me, I'm someone for whom I've tried a lot of different meditation techniques, and none of them have had a strong impact on me. And whereas Philippe has been practicing meditation for a long time, and it's a huge part of your life. And so we had a really big discussion around it, and then we had a guided session, which was fantastic. Thank you so much. After that, Philippe then messaged me and said, "Hey, I want to have a chat to you about self-awareness versus spacious minds and the difference between the two." And I thought, you know what? I don't know what the difference is between those, or I can have a guess, but I don't fully know what the definition is. But why don't we have this conversation live? So, Philippe, over to you.
Yes.
Please tell me, what is your definition of self-awareness? What is your definition of spacious minds? And what do you see is the difference between the two?
Okay. First, thank you, Scott, for organizing those events again. So I'm very grateful for that. I know it's a lot of work, so I want to show some appreciation around that. So thank you. I was trying to reflect on that, how to best describe self-awareness and the difference between self-awareness and a spacious mind. First, I've learned through some studies that there are a lot of people out there that claim they have self-awareness. And when the scientists did some research, they saw a very big disconnect between the claim, like I have self-awareness, and the reality. And in a nutshell, most people are somehow delusional around their self-awareness. So it's kind of interesting to know. It's like, okay, I think I know myself, but actually it's not that clear. Actually, that's what's happening. This being said, there are people that have a very healthy sense of what's happening in their mind, and we need to really acknowledge that. So self-awareness, I was trying to find an image to describe that in the best possible way. So let's say we compare your mind with the ocean, and your thoughts and your emotions are the waves. Self-awareness for me would be you are in the waves and you notice all the waves, and you're bathing in that realm of the waves. So you know that there is a wave coming to you that is anger. There's a second wave after this is, I don't know, sadness, and the fourth wave, it will be fear, and so you're aware, but at the same time you're really within that sphere of being in the waves all the time, which means that it's very possible, if not likely, that you miss some other thoughts and some emotions, because let's say you have a big wave coming at you, it's much more difficult to be mindful of all the other small waves that are around. And you can have an appreciation for that for yourself. Like if you have a very strong emotion coming to you, then suddenly you shut down all the other aspects, like in your mind. Let's say you take a walk somewhere, it's a beautiful day, you receive a phone call, and someone really puts you down or something like it, and then anger comes. And you're so angry that you don't notice that there are kids playing, and you don't notice that it's a beautiful day, you don't notice the sun, the flowers and everything, you're just in that anger. So if I compare that to the wave, you're being carried away by the big wave, but you don't see necessarily all the other waves that are around you. So that's one way for me to describe self-awareness. So you have an idea of what's going on in your mind. At the same time, your own mind can be carried away and limit, in some aspect, the self-awareness. Mm-hmm. Spaciousness is different. So spaciousness, it's you are the waves, but at the same time, you are the ocean. And so it's just a matter of expanding your mind. So if you're expanding your mind, it's a bit difficult to describe until you really realize that for yourself. And usually that happens in a meditation. But the space is just your mind suddenly gets bigger and bigger, which means if I compare that to the waves and the ocean, suddenly you become more the ocean. And part of the ocean is the waves. The waves are part of the ocean. They are binding together. There's no wave without the ocean. There's no ocean without waves. That's just the way it is. But at the same time, because you are the ocean, you have this spaciousness and this distance, which means that you can remain in the ocean-like aspect of your mind and just see all the waves for what they are. So suddenly in that spaciousness, you see anger, you see the flower, you see the sun, you enjoy the smell of the roses and all that. And it's all happening in one single time or space, but you can remain in the space and you're no longer washed by the wave. So that will be one way to describe the distinction between self-awareness and spaciousness of the mind.
Okay. That's really interesting. So for my interpretation, having listened to you describe that, it feels like it's almost two levels of the same thing. That's the image that's coming to mind, right? Self-awareness is sort of recognizing the individual being, and spacious minds is kind of the next level beyond that, which is the acknowledgement of the being as part of a broader whole or a system or something like that. And what's really funny is, so this morning I was watching a video which is a commencement speech by this guy called David Foster Wallace. And it was called "This Is Water." Have you come across this before?
I think that rings a bell. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Because there's a really small story that he used to start this thing off, and he says, "There's a little story. He goes, there are these two young fish swimming along. They happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way. He nods at them and says, 'Morning, boys. How's the water?' And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other one and goes, 'What the hell is water?'" And that kind of brings me back to kind of what you're sort of talking about. Like there's a concept of, I guess, self-awareness being being just the fish, and then spacious minds, I guess, using your words, is then that broader awareness of the surrounding around it. But my argument back, or rather not my argument, but my sort of point back is that also not self-awareness? Is that not simply sort of self-awareness 2.0, like in some ways, the spacious minds, that is?
It is definitely a different aspect of self-awareness. It's actually a better aspect of self-awareness, in my opinion, or experience. The thing is, I mean, in one way you compare the waves, and the other way you compare the ocean. And although the two are intertwined and combined and interdependent, it's better to be the ocean than to be the waves. So when you have self-awareness, you can identify which thoughts and emotions are rising in your mind. At the same time, you can still get carried away by those. If I push your buttons, maybe I can create some anger in your mind stream, depending on what I say to you. And then that anger can carry you away into some kind of stories and everything. But if you are the ocean, then you can see the anger for what it is, and it's just a wave. It's going to go, rise, and fade away. At the same time, you can see that and can see other things happening in your mind at the same time, and can just have that ground or that calmness of the whole ocean.
Yeah, it's so I find this really interesting because I think this goes to, if anything, there's aspects of definition within this, and I think that this is where there's and where this specificity is really good, and why I also really appreciate these kinds of conversations, right? It's because the words like self-awareness, something as simple as that, can mean quite a few different things to quite a few different people, depending on what value or belief set we bring to it. Because, so for me, firstly, yes, very much to your point that, we can be aware of things that are happening to us, but that means that there can also be people that are stuck inside the emotion. Just because I'm aware that you've triggered me on, say, anger, if I can't control it, then that I'm still being taken away by the waves, so to speak. For me, I see it as several. I've always thought about it as a little bit of a pyramid. That self-actualizing style of thing. Where there definitely are a lot of people who might sort of just be carried on by the waves, and which is fine. Again, this is just, people might be at that stage, and then you get to a point where it's kind of like, am I listening to myself when I speak? Am I aware of what my interface is with, say, the world as one? And then being able to accept that, and then being able to change that, and then being able to see that as part of the whole. And there's a ladder of self-awareness in some regards as a result of that. And I find that a really interesting one, because it's a spectrum of self-awareness in many regards, and it's just like, at what level does that need to be? There's another person I was reading recently. Her name is Tasha Urich, I believe. Let me double check that. Yeah, Tasha Urich. Have you come across her before?
No, I didn't.
So she's a organizational psychologist, and I believe she's done a PhD on self-awareness too. And she has another interesting definition of this, because she's looked around at all these different papers. And yes, as we already denoted, there's several different versions, but where she landed was this idea of internal self-awareness and external self-awareness as two parameters on a little grid. And she made this point, actually, that there's people with a lot of introspection, that's not necessarily the same as having good self-awareness, because it's kind of like the what's it called, the Ouroboros, like the snake that eats its tail. You can kind of just continue to spiral inwards and inwards and inwards. So you can trigger my anger, and then I can just go deeper and deeper and deeper, and I'm aware of it, but that doesn't mean I'm necessarily self-aware. And then you have external self-awareness, which is the awareness of how other people see us and how we interact with other people as well.
That's a very interesting concept, yeah.
And I wonder if that comes back to your point of the ocean analogy, because fundamentally we are still individuals. We still sit inside this space that is us. Even if we are the ocean, we kind of still know we are at a point. We're a dot point in the ocean itself. But being able to observe the ocean and be the ocean potentially is a form of external self-awareness. And what are your thoughts on that?
I'm not 100% sure, because I would need to dive into her material to really get a clear understanding. The way I would describe self-awareness is pretty much very much internal for me, and from the experience of meditation I have. And as you said, what I would say is just there are different layers of self-awareness. And it's for me, the experience was something along the line of peeling the onions. So you have the outer layers, and there are the gross stories and thoughts and emotion that we have, like the daily things and the daily stories and the educational stories, the things we were told, and that creates imprinting stories in our mind. But that's kind of the gross level. But after that, you can peel that and you can attain some more subtle level, and some are a deeper state of mind, like the subconscious. Maybe you could say you can access that at times in meditation. And by doing so, you can keep peeling this onion of your mind. So for me, self-awareness is pretty much internal. The way people perceive you, it's also their own stories and perception. Some people may think I'm a nice guy, and some people think I'm not a nice guy, and I'm still the same person. So I'm not too familiar about her material. I would definitely need to have a deep dive into that.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, that's just my 2 cents on the levels. Yeah.
Well, okay. So listening to that and going sort of deeper and deeper internal, do you feel that it's possible to get too internal and almost too introspective? And what I mean by that is, as someone that, whilst I don't practice meditation per se, I do spend a lot of time reflecting inwards and inwards and inwards. And I get to that point where it sounds really strange to say, I sometimes struggle with like existentialism, like what am I? I'm nothing. I'm just a combination of, of atoms that come together, and I see my flow in the entire world and all that sort of stuff, right? But it gets to a point of like, I am nothing, or to bring like Socrates into this, I know that I know nothing. I know that my construct of the world is just my experiences, my perceptions, and that's what that might be, right? And it gets to a point where, and this is kind of where I've been thinking around, like, whilst I can peel back the onions ensure that there is, call it like nothing left, or that there is just my essence, doesn't take away from the fact that at a tangible level, I'm still in the world. We are still in the ocean. And which means that there are, of course, other people who are in the ocean as well. And that's where I feel like, for me, where I've started to play around with using your words, spacious minds, is that idea of being able to broaden the awareness out to other people, right? And to other systems in it. So again, layering the onions back on.
Yeah.
So I know that there's like, let's say there's 5 different layers to me of my onions, and each layer is based on the experiences that I've had. Now, I know that I see the world in this way, and I'm very aware that I see the world in this way. And I know that you would see the world through your own versions of the onion. And thus, to hold your self-awareness in me would require me to be able to peel all my layers away and then be able to put your layers on.
Yeah.
And be able to kind of, this is like almost like empathy, like extreme empathy, I'm not just trying to relate to you, I'm trying to be you. I'm trying to understand your perspectives and your life experiences, and what, if you like the color blue, is there a particular reason you like the color blue? Was it your upbringing? Whatever, all those types of things. And then of course you can extend that further into like political views or values or whatever that might be.
That I find that really, really interesting, and I think we could spend a long time discussing all that. But before that, maybe I'd like to step back on a couple of ideas and concepts. Sometimes when you have self-awareness, it also means that you have a very active way of thinking. So let's say if I compare your mind with muddy water, you take a glass of water and there's a bit of dirt or mud inside, and you keep stirring it. And if you keep stirring that, then there's no clarity in the water. It keeps agitating that, and you can't really see through. And when you do introspection, sometimes a lot of people do in a very active way, if not aggressive way by the time, meaning I really want to know, I want to force myself, I'm going to dive into that subject and push. And for me, it's a bit like having this glass of dirty water and keep agitating and trying to see things in that. The way I would see meditation is to take that glass of water and keep it as still as possible. Because if you do that, then sedimentation will happen, which means the dirt will slowly drop. And eventually you will have clear water, and clear water is the pure awareness of your mind that you already possess, but you don't see it because it's all stirring all the time. So I just wanted to mention that because I think there's a bit of a difference between this very active introspection and trying to learn and know and everything, which is a lot of steering the mind, and the meditational aspect, I would say, of approaching the mind, which is, this is the muddy space. I'm just going to have as much stillness as possible, and eventually the mud will just settle, and I will have clarity. And when you have clarity, that's at the same time you have clarity, you experience spaciousness. That's just what I wanted to mention.
Absolutely. So, and I very much agree with the idea of active, like the active self-awareness, that active introspection. I agree. I think that's where, if we don't understand how it works, it can continue to muddy and cloud the mind, right? But to use your example with the bottle of water, active introspection can be a little bit like shaking the bottle of water. It's like you're trying to do this and do this, do this and do that and do that. But I also wonder that sometimes with that introspection, and sometimes with being able to take other perspectives into consideration, that there are also other ways of seeing, of achieving that type of clarity. I have a theory that, or a hypothesis rather, that sometimes us trying to do this is because obviously we're looking for clarity, but we're also not realizing that perhaps maybe the bottle itself might be dirty, right? And so even if the mind is still, we don't necessarily have the right tools to be able to do that. And I sometimes think that part of conversations like this, for example, the whole raison d'etre of Open Minds is to be able to sometimes get a different perspective. And by having a different perspective, I allow it to map to my bottle of dirty water. And then actually, it might show me that there's a different way of looking at the bottle that brings a different type of clarity to it. That sometimes there could be a different prism that is applied. I've been playing with also this concept with finding clarity as well, where if we think of our emotions behind us, the experiences that we've gone through as this big, messy cloud of like, oh, these things happen, I don't really understand why. And then someone comes along and says, hey, here's a structure, or here's a perspective. And it's like a jigsaw piece, right? Where all the emotional cloud behind us, the dirty water behind us, here's a piece that fits one section of it. And when it fits in perfectly, you're like, aha. And that, for me, I wonder if that is actually a bit of that aha moment, where it's kind of like, this thing that I didn't know how to make sense of, this bottle I wasn't sure how to make sense of, someone's now showed me, actually, you're looking at it in the wrong direction. You just need to twist it slightly. And all of a sudden, that makes sense. And that's another type of achieving some of that spaciousness.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. I think you can have a number of tools and systems and way to look at things. At the same time, so I would consider that like a short-term answer. At the same time, I will keep seeking a long-term answer. So for me, one of the questions is, do you want to be happy in 10 years from now? And if you do, then you need to work today on settling your mind, because it takes time, it takes effort, and it takes time. At the same time, I cannot ask you to wait 10 years to hypothetical result depending on how much you practice and how well you do. If you have other tactics to really handle your emotions and behavior and change things today, by all means, you should definitely choose them. That's 100%. What I find is a lot of people are really focused on the short term and misestimate, I would say, I'm not sure that's a word, but the long-term impact of a regular practice. So to come back to the glass of water and the mud, let's say your mind is that agitated glass of water with a bit of dirt or mud inside. When you stop agitating that glass of water, it's going to take time for the dirt to settle, and people give up in that phase because it's like, okay, it's been whatever time and I don't see any results. It's not that you don't see any results, it's just they are not visible from your perspective yet. If you're a scientist, for example, you would say, well, that's obvious, the sedimentation has started. If I have my spectroanalytic tool, I can see that the top layer has changed in comparison to the bottom layer. But you don't have that tool when you do that. So I think people will really give up easily on the long-term aspect and stop the process. So they will keep steering after that the glass of water and coming back to their previous state. So I would definitely pursue both aspects. If you have a trick for today, please by all means take it, but don't drop the long-term vision.
No, you're absolutely right. I think it's what we're getting to is something that you mentioned in our last discussion, which is expecting an outcome from something, right? So part of this is like, because fundamentally some of what we're talking about is let's call it sense making, right? It's trying to make sense of things, and there's ways of doing that, which is obviously one, which is being able to sit and let it sediment and let it stop. And then there's also sometimes the bigger question of like, okay, well, if I'm still, what are all the dirty bottles around me? Is my bottle even the right bottle? Should it be a bottle? Should it actually be a jar? Should it be a container? Like there's different ways of looking at different things. Actually, you can get even more clarity by twisting in a certain way. And so it's almost like it's both being able to, a cycle of both getting new information that helps us with sense making, but also understanding that idea is often a borrowed idea until such time as we can sit in it. I'll throw one last analogy at you because I've enjoyed playing with this idea as well, which is that sometimes when with sense making, it's kind of like we're borrowing someone else's item of clothing, right? Like, I'm cold. I'm feeling really cold at the moment. Can I borrow your jacket? And your jacket in this example is sort of perhaps your perspective, your layers of onion of the world. And I put it on and it's like, this makes sense, right? And for now, I'd be like, I'm warm, which might be the short-termness. But then afterwards, there's a question of, well, is this really the jacket for me? Because I might start to outgrow the jacket. And if I'm stuck on saying, no, this is the one that for me, then that's where it stops as well. Where it's kind of like, actually, that sediment that's settled down, actually the bottle's not big enough anymore. We actually need a different bottle now, that type of a thing. So I think it is, as to your point, is that combination of both. It's being able to put on different jackets, but also being able to sit in it and sort of go, is this really the right thing for me? What can I take? What do I like about it? What don't I like about it? And that's where that stillness does come in from my, like, how I'm taking away from this.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of positive outcome coming from stillness. I'm not exactly sure why people are so afraid of it. Like they think they're going to lose their mind, or I don't know what exactly. But it's actually very enjoyable. I think in Buddhism, they speak about happiness and enlightenment and everything. But the one of the maybe more accurate translation is a state of bliss. And a state of bliss is a state of very peaceful, calm awareness that is, if not constant, eternal for those people who attain enlightenment. And it's not a happy state of mind the way you describe happiness usually when you receive a gift or have a good chocolate cake or with a good coffee in Melbourne. But it's a form of natural flow, maybe, like something that it's just a natural flow. It's just how it is, and you're at ease with whatever is happening.
Well, the word that comes to mind for me, sorry to interrupt, the word that comes to mind for me is almost acceptance, right? It is because I think bliss has an interesting connotation, which is like it can also denote levels of joy and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas sometimes like acceptance is kind of like the whole I am the ocean, which means I can go through a really rough patch and still be fine. And I can go through a really happy patch and also be fine.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it's a case of like what is.
Yeah. That's a very good point, because I think one of the definition of bliss maybe is a state where you have neither attachment nor rejection. And that's a very common trait of our mind. Like let's say if you're in a happy mood today and everything's going fine, your business is great, and a couple of calls with more companies booking the art, and it's like, wow, this is awesome. And what's going to happen at a subtle level, maybe, or gross level, depending on how you are, you're going to get attached to that. So you want tomorrow to feel exactly like today. You want to have the same vibe and the same vibrancy and everything. And attachment creates suffering. And so that's rejection. So rejection, the way you can explain that, it's let's say you want to be the nice guy and sometimes you're jealous. There are other founders around you, they are super successful and everything, but you want to be the nice guy. So when jealousy comes, you just say, oh no, that's not me. So you repress that, you push that away. And that's something that we do very, very often. So we have either attachment or rejection in our mind. And when you're in a state of equanimity or bliss or happiness, I don't know how to describe that now, you don't really get attached or we don't really reject. It's just whatever happens, and the emotions just are the way because they just come and go, and you're just the ocean. So
yeah. See, so I very much understand that part, and also mindful that we're getting close to time, so we'll wrap this last bit up. But I do want to say that where my mind is at these days with that particular concept is that acceptance can also, I posit, lead to a space where we don't necessarily care.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's not always a good thing, is my argument. Because sometimes it's kind of like having that, like, in order to affect change, right? Because we are in the ocean, there's other people in the ocean, so therefore we have to be able to interface with other people, right? And so that in and of itself, this discussion in and of itself, us like contrasting our layers of onion, right? There's that interplay back and forth between me caring about an idea and you receiving that idea. I mean, if we sit in pure nothingness, the most fundamental way of describing something like this is just two people exchanging words that may not go anywhere. Doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it could also lead to complete nothingness either. But at some point, we do need to care. And so it's almost sitting within that imperfection. And that's why I think for me, there's that acceptance of imperfection. Being able to. I used to be someone that would find that jealousy, and my mind would go, no, you shouldn't be jealous. This is what you're thinking. Da 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 da. And I try and control it. I'd call it my intellectual self controlling my emotional self. Whereas these days, I've kind of gotten to the point where I just say, you know what? It's valid to feel, say, envy. I shouldn't suppress that envy, but I also understand why I'm feeling it as well. So I am the onion. I am the onion. I see the onion. I know how it opens. I know other people's onions too. And so with that, it creates a level of state where that allows us to kind of play around with going, yeah, I can have emotions and I can understand what those emotions mean. And thus it can then relate to other people. But it's hard to sit in that state, you know. And it's taken me a long time to release my brain from being able to kind of get to that area where it's kind of like a double helix of emotional and intellectual souls.
Well, thank you for sharing that. There's a lot of wisdom into that. So yeah, but I would agree on your point that if you just have bare acceptance, then you may not care about anything. And strangely enough, when your mind gets spacious to that point of things happening and they don't really bother you, it's not a careless acceptance, it's a compassionate one. And people have a lot of misunderstanding around compassion, but compassion is actually extremely active. Compassion is wanting to change when you see suffering. It's not pity, you know. It's not when you see someone in the street that is homeless and hungry. It's not looking down to that person there. It's just being with that person, being and accepting and receiving the suffering at the same time, trying to act toward releasing that suffering. It's a very active state.
Definitely. And I think that the operative word there is active. And I'll link that. There's someone on LinkedIn mentioned the carnal self, Fatih. So thank you for that comment. And I think where we're talking about is almost potentially one step beyond that, which is we're not just the emotional self. There's an active component to it. Of course, again, Fatih, I know I'm just kind of projecting maybe what your definition of that is. So very aware of that component of it. But that could be a discussion for another time as well. Thank you so much for this conversation. I really enjoyed this discussion.
Scott. Yeah.
No worries. So for anybody else,
beneficial for people.
No,
I just hope they are beneficial.
Absolutely, I can't agree more. For anyone who joined us halfway through, so we're wrapping up now. But I just want to reiterate, the point of this type of episode or this type of discussion was just experiencing the joy of playing with perspectives and ideas live and not having a solution. This is us both sort of sitting in the ocean and kind of paddling around a little bit and kind of going, what about this? What about that? And this is our bit of sense making. So I really enjoyed this conversation. Again, like you said, hopefully for everyone else who's watching, maybe there's a little bit of that perspective as well. So for everyone who might be watching afterwards, if you enjoyed this, please do follow. You can also find Philippe. Philippe, you're on LinkedIn most of the time. Is that correct?
Yeah, definitely. You can find me on LinkedIn. It's easy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Philippe is incredible. He's not only here to talk about self-awareness and meditation, but he's also an incredible industrial designer with a strong triple bottom line and circular economy sort of thinking. So please check him out and follow him as well. If anyone else has any ideas or topics or discussions that you want to engage with me on, or you want to play around and just open all our minds, please do come and just drop me a message afterwards and we can have a chat. I'd love to expand this and have this, build this community that's even more so around expanding and opening our minds. So with that said, please stay safe, stay upbeat. I'll see you guys next week.
Thank you for having me, Scott.
Thank you so much, Philippe.
Very grateful. Bye for now.